All right, everybody, welcome to another edition of the Georgia Track and Field and Cross Country Coaching Collective podcast. I'm Andy Christie, and today I'm joined by Bill Stewart, who is a community assistant coach at Walton High School. Welcome, Bill, to the podcast.
Hi, welcome. Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, just to give everybody a little info about Bill, who I know you've probably seen around at various meets. Been at Walton since 1998. Is that correct, Bill?
Actually, did about I've informally, but formally since 2001.
Okay, gotcha. And then in New Jersey before that.
Correct. Yes, I spent a little. I coached a little bit of time in New Jersey for my old high school team, Cherry Hill East. Right after, in between college and when I went to grad school at Wake Forest.
Gotcha. Um, at Walton, been a part of four state championships, three in cross country, one in track, uh,
Yep.
and then has worked with two great coaches, Coach Tom Williams and Coach Travis Gower,
Mm-hmm.
and worked closely with those two coaches. Coach Tom Williams, Georgia Hall of Fame member, and Coach Travis Gower. I'm sure will be there one day as well. So you've had some great
To
people
join his dad. Yeah.
join his dad, Lee Gower, yes, of McEacher and Walton, and various other schools fame. So, Bill, to get us started off, just kind of what we ask everybody: what got you into running?
It was a very long time ago, but my older brother was a runner and ran for Cherry Hill East High School, which is where the high school that I went to, which is a school very much like Walton. Actually, in fact, the overlap is amazing in terms of just kind of the demographics and all sorts of other things. But I ran for them, and because I wanted, of course, like a lot of younger brothers, wanted to be just like my older brother. And so that's how I eventually got into it. And yeah, and then it just, ended up being better at it than swimming, which is what I had done up to that point. And so, yeah, it's just brought me a lot of different places and went to college to do it. And, and then eventually went to the Land Track Club, the competitive team to also run. So, yeah, it's brought me a long, long way.
Excellent. Yeah, that's what's great about this running community. Like you have your your races and your teams you're a part of, but then you get to meet people and go
Yep.
experience things. And yeah, it sounds like your journey's been a great one so far. Um,
Yeah, no, I think that's a key point because it is something I think that most runners realize this even after they get out of high school and college, that no matter where you move, you have a community.
yes.
Yeah.
So, how in particular did you end up at Walton?
So that was actually an interesting story. So I was actually with the Atlanta Track Club competitive team at that point, still and running pretty competitively. And a good friend of mine, Mr. Pete Ray, who I think you may be familiar with, he's the coach over at Zap Fitness,
Yes.
which is an elite runner camp up in Boone and Bowling Rock, North Carolina. He was actually coaching at Walton at that time. And he knew that he was going to move on to Zap. And so he had said, "Hey, listen, if you've got some extra time, why don't you come on and help?" When we had a couple of pretty very good runners, I think Charlie Dickhouse and Sam Brzezinski that had entered the fold at that point, and so I was able to be kind of like one of the younger runners who could run with those guys at practice, and helped out with Pete, and then did that for a year or so. And then Pete went up to North Carolina, and Tom was obviously there at that point. Pete was helping Tom out, and Tom said, "Oh well, let's hang around." And I just had enjoyed it so much because I had at that point I had actually been coaching post collegiates, and had a bunch of people in the mostly focusing on, oddly enough, women marathoners, and so had done a lot of different things with that coaching. And so it had some background, but not at the high school level. And so it was a nice balance because I was still coaching a bunch of elite female athletes. I mean, anywhere from 234 in the marathon to 241 had, 6 or 7 athletes there. And so it was something completely different because, at that point, they're all, they were very, very good athletes and you kind of directed them, mostly just held them back. And high school was more of the teaching aspect and the, kind of helping kids understand the sport from its very basics. And, and it was a nice balance. And then eventually, I kind of stopped doing the elite coaching just because of the time constraints it takes. I was also working still full time at that point. And so, yeah, that just coaching, high school is just one of those things that I love to do. And so it just, once it gets its hooks in you, as you well know, it's a very difficult habit to leave.
So yeah, you kind of touched on this, but that makes me curious. Yeah, what the biggest differences would be between the elite females, adult runners versus the high school athlete.
Yeah, and at that point in their careers, and these are talking about like one of the runners I was coach, Valerie Young, who's actually her husband went to Walton. Though she was two-time NCAA champion, and was then preparing for what. So there's not a lot of of the basics that you have to work on. Mostly it's primarily composing a plan that is properly periodized to be able to peak at the right time, get them to the right race, and they're going to do all the little things to get done. So you as a coach, you're not you're more focused on making sure that it's balanced, and also those athletes tend to be highly motivated. And so lots of times there's more of an emphasis on making sure that they don't overdo it. Where in high school, obviously a lot of the things is, you're worried much more about some of the basic biomechanics. You're worried about motivation in terms of getting them to do the work and being able to move them up. You're taking them from, where they're doing 15 or 20 miles a week and, doubling their mileage or tripling their mileage over a 4-year career. Whereas, the elite athletes, you're maybe taking it, they're already doing 60, 70, 80, and maybe you're taking them from 90 to 110 or something like that if they're a marathoner. But, they're at that point, you're working a little bit more, less, it's less of a difference between what you see in the 4 years. And also, you're many of the athletes that I coached, you're working for 6, 7, 8 years, whereas in high school you've got a much shorter turnaround. And lots of times, you probably average about 2 or 3 years with each athlete. Some are there for 4, but right. It is a much different thing, and it also, the balance is much different in terms of where running fits in their life. Whereas the elite runners, it's a big deal. Whereas the high school runners, they've got 9,000 other things that they worry about.
Right. And then I would imagine that'd be an interesting difference of, the elite women have already reached a certain level, but the high school athlete, you get to see them progress through the ranks on the team and move their way, whether it's improving their position on the team or their times or both.
Yeah. I mean, the physics and there's a lot of stuff is all the same, but yeah, there's the differences is certainly a lot of on the margins, and also, like you said, just in the time period where they're sitting in their careers.
So this is kind of a very open-ended question, but I'm curious if you could tell me what you think your coaching philosophy might be, and this could be just an overall arching kind of belief, or you don't have to necessarily get into the nuts and bolts of the workouts, although you certainly can if you want. But I'm thinking more just your coaching almost mission statement, if you will.
It's in some ways a difficult question to answer. In some ways it's easy. The easy part is that I have been blessed with running for my entire career and seen all the wonderful things it does in terms of helping with discipline and everything like that. And my basic philosophy is to share the benefits of running. And, so from a completely non-technical perspective, it's going ahead and making kids more aware of all the things that this helps with that are not even necessarily related to the actual physical part of it. in terms of the discipline and be able to delay gratification and being able to build friendship networks and all those other things and be able to get out some of those wonderful things, which, interestingly enough, is really probably the most important part in many ways of the high school experience, because very few of the kids will end up being professionals. So I think in a generalized vision, I would say, that, sharing of all the benefits that I've gotten from running to another generation or, other individuals. From a technical standpoint, I tend to buy in, and all the many of the coaches I highly, highly respect, whether that's, Pete Ray, and another guy I ran with, who coaches at Wake Forest now, John Hayes, who coaches very successfully at Wake Forest University, and all of them tend to be, and my old coach from Ken O'Brien from UMass, tend to be along the lines of, it's a not a dramatic kind of, you're lying in the infield throwing up after every hard workout, but it tends to be a more gradual approach where you do a lot of moderate runs. But there's a big focus on being able to do strong long runs and being able to kind of build in smaller increments rather than necessarily doing those big kind of shifts. I do tend to put not as much emphasis on the pure speed in terms of that, though the mechanics are always there. In other words, you always want some component, but it's not so much in terms of, building that highly anaerobic type of speed capacity. Because in our business, it tends to be not that huge a percentage of the race. It also tends to be where you got your highest injury percentage in some of that high intensity work. And so I think as a coach, and I think you probably acknowledge, the first rule is try to keep the athlete healthy, because that has caused more seasonal problems than just about anything else.
Yes.
And so, that's what I generally use is kind of an approach that tends to be a little bit more moderate and in the middle in terms, and, with a big, strong emphasis on threshold runs and long runs and, progression runs and those kind of things.
That's great. I love that. I think what you just said reminded me of a couple of things. I can't remember if it's Coach Jay Johnson or someone else that said this online that I read, but they talked about the idea of hitting a lot of singles and doubles in practice, but not going for the home runs. Like it's stacking day upon day and not spending your race in the workouts, but getting quality work in, kind of where you feel like you get done with the workout and could have done one more rep, but you didn't, kind of idea. And then you talking about touching on the speed stuff. I've had athletes, that coach, I want to get my foot speed better. And there's, like you said, there's mechanical things we can do, but other times I say, like, talk to your mom or dad, because it's the genes that they gave you. Kind of play into things too, in terms of where somebody is, maybe naturally talented. Certainly we can work at things, but it's interesting with, some runners or distance runners are more suited to the 800-mile versus mile 2-mile. Anyway, that's just something that made me think.
Well, and it's interesting to bring it up too, is that, and not to go off, I don't think it's too much of a tangent, but that aspect is changing slightly with the introduction of some of the new equipment in terms of shoes and things like that. My original background, as I mentioned at the beginning, was swimming. And if you look at swimming workouts, it is entirely composed of intervals. And, there is no such thing as a long, slow distance day in swimming. You may do longer intervals, but you're not doing. And what's interesting is that swimmers tend, that's why swimmers can do 10, 7 or 8 events, because they've got this enormous base and background that they can do and perform at a very high level over, several events and recovery times, because it really is, it has always been one of the things that, has constrained running and people was you can only do so much work before you break, and swimming has a far less capacity for that. Well, now we're starting to see with the new equipment and some of the new shoes that is kind of pushing that, where you will see, where, certainly people from my era have been, now you're, talking about double thresholds, like the Norwegian method and all sorts of other things that have been, that are actually proving a lot more effective now than they were when, oh gosh, I can't remember. You may be able to remember the guy's name who went to that Illinois high school. The kid who spent there, who helped develop the Norwegian method.
Oh, Marius.
Yeah, Marius Bakken.
There we
Thank you very much. Sorry, but yeah, he, a lot of times that you couldn't do it nearly as much just because the capacity was not there on that
go.
runner level. And now all of a sudden with shoes that tend to, I think that was actually more responsible now than the original. Just the fact of the propulsion from the shoes is the fact that you can now increase the amount of work you can do with athletes without necessarily increasing the amount of injuries from overuse.
Mhm.
Now, high school again is another complete thing. It's you don't the constraints more often with the beginning runner are more there than with the elites. Grant Fisher is going to do something completely different than even a Stephen Pfeiffer or somebody like one of our high quality kids. You're still a big difference. In what you can do.
Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe it kind of closes the gap between some of those things. I mean, there's still a gap, but maybe it shifts things a little bit. Like a few years ago, well, maybe it's been almost 10 years, 8 to 10 years ago. I really went all in on Daniel's
Yep.
training method. I just had never. I touched on certain things with it, but I'd never kind of just gone all in on it. And what I realized, at least for my runners, was a lot of it seemed to be geared more towards the older athlete,
Mm-hmm.
and there were things that I definitely had to tweak. Um, and so, but yeah, like you're saying, like some of these other the shoes, the recovery that they provide, the advantage they provide, maybe that's gonna kind of shift some things at the high school level. I don't know. I mean, we're already seeing, the more kids running faster times than they ever
Yeah.
have.
Oh, yeah. 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 You can already see that, and I think that's kind of a snowball that rolls downhill.
Mhm.
I've always, you look at, oh gosh, at the NCAA level, it's just ridiculous now. And a lot of that is that it builds upon itself in terms of if you get one or two runners trying to run under 4 minutes in the mile, it's a whole different battle than when you got 12 guys that are trying to run it. It builds
Yes.
it actually carries along the group and the pack is much different, So and I think that helps with, just having more people who are that talented and have that kind of work ethic.
Yes, I love that. For example, sectionals now that we've had for over 10 years in Georgia, that is, in my mind, dramatically, made us better
Oh
because
yeah, absolutely.
the
Yeah.
times it takes to get on the podium now versus what it was pre-sectionals when it was just top two from region in each event, are just I mean, it's just drastically deeper. I mean, I know
Yep.
that's not the only reason, but that's certainly something that I think has helped. And I was going to bring this up later, but I'll go ahead since we're talking about it. I pulled some stats. 28 boys sub 420 this season, 29 girls. This is across all classifications. 29 girls 506 or faster. And of course, we had our first sub four boy in Tommy Latham of Marist.
Yep.
And then 20 girls sub 11 this season, 16 boys sub 920. You're talking about times that maybe we would have a handful
Yeah.
of kids.
4, 5. Yeah.
Yeah, and now
And
we're
be in different divisions. They were never together,
yes,
hardly ever.
and now well into the double digits.
Yeah.
Which I think I like what you said about like just the kind of it trickling downhill, more knowledge out there about what other people are running instead of having to search it up in the newspaper, maybe seeing it
Yep.
the fine print, but maybe more knowledgeable coaches. I don't know, like kids competing, like you said, against more talented kids, and that's going to just breed success for everybody. Iron
Yeah.
sharpens iron.
No, I absolutely agree with you because having started my competitive running career in high school in New Jersey, which has a well-developed history with distance running and things like that. And particularly, I noticed that was one of the biggest differences between coaching in Georgia and the way the high school athletes would compete in back in the early 2000s and things like that, I would look and be like, huh, there were places that were isolated. There were like 5 or 6 schools here and there and that were, around the state that were highly competitive because they had coaches that knew what they were doing and things like that. But they were relatively, just clumped together.
Mhm.
And whereas one of the advantages I saw in New Jersey is that, you had a much more compact state, everything. And I think that helped. It wasn't that the kids were any less talented in Georgia, which you're now seeing, because you look at Georgia as competitive with any state, certainly with New Jersey and some of the other ones. But it was a matter of, both geography in terms of being spread out all over the state, and also expertise that you brought out, where you're going through it now. You're getting more kids and the meet structure is much better, like you said, where you'd take 2 from region. Well, what happens is that you'd get those big splotches where all the good kids were, and they'd all eliminate each other early on in the process, and so you wouldn't get the type of competitive atmosphere at the state meet and the sectional meet that you do now. And there's still some vestiges, I think, of that in Georgia, but it is not nearly the case as it was when you were competing and when I started coaching here.
Gotcha. Yes. Um, Shifting gears a little bit back to your Walton experience, what has it been like having close working relationships with first Tom Williams and then Travis Gower? Because I imagine that's been a lot of fun to have somebody
Oh
to
yeah.
always kind of partner in crime. So yeah, what have you kind of taken away from those coaching relationships?
Well, and you know what? It's funny, but obviously they're both dear friends. And as a coaching with your co-coaches and things like that, you have to be these are some of your closest relationships. So and I think the defining thing about both of them, and I think defining thing, and most of the successful coaches that I've met, is that they're always open to, hey, what about this? And they're not married to, okay, listen, we're going to do it this way, my way, and then I'm not going to listen to anything else. I think when we have coaches discussions, and we have another community coach on our team, Beth Old, who is formerly and who's in Georgia Tech's Hall of Fame for her running. And so what's very good is that we do tend to have a collaborative a type of atmosphere. And both Tom and Travis are really good at that, and being able to take certain things and you make, there's plenty of times that, I would come up with something, he would come up with something, and you know what, we end up with a combination, Tom, and things. And that's way better to go about things, and that, I think that's the key to, a good coaching relationship. And that's what I kind of take, is that I learn a lot from them, and, who knows if occasionally they learn something from me. But it also helped that, as we discussed, that my background was completely different with the elite type of athlete. And it took me several years to be able to change the way I would look at things, to be able to, for the high school athlete versus something that I did for the elite. And that was, that was really informative. And obviously if you're going to learn from people, that, Tom and Travis are 2 of the best to learn from, and it helps. And then you look around, and I think that's also one of the things is too, and you see that it's with all Georgia coaches, is they're really good at exchanging ideas.
Yes, I love that about our coaching community. I mean, that's something we're trying to do, with the coaching collective, is continue
Mm-hmm.
that process. But I love running into you or other coaches at meets, and hey, what do you think about this idea? Or we're always trying to
Yep.
improve our methods. Um, but talking about you and Travis or you and Tom, I've had um, some assistant coaches over the years where, and my former one, Michael Sexton in particular, where it's so much fun when you've got somebody else that's just as invested as you and wants to come up with the best
Mm-hmm.
idea. The best idea wins. It doesn't matter who comes up with it, but what's the best idea for how we're gonna coach these kids to hopefully their best performances. Um,
Yeah, and as you know, different teams have different personalities over the
yes.
years. So you can't coach if you just have one way of coaching, it's just not going to work, because sometimes it might work, but you have to change. And when you have a bunch of different perspectives on a coaching staff, that makes it that much easier and that much better to be able to change those perspectives and be able to see things, because everybody has their blind spots. Every coach does.
Yes.
And the more quality people you surround yourself with, is that the better you're going to be. Now, the other thing too that I think is interesting is that particularly as a community coach, I thought this was particularly important, was that it's still Travis's or Tom, what Tom's call. You have to have a single entity. That, okay, listen, I like this, but this is what we're going to do.
Mhm.
And I think it's that, because I've had discussions, and I know you probably have come up against this with kids, have private coaching outside the season or try to do something. And it's not so much that necessarily that the private coach might or might not know what they're doing. It's that you cannot serve, in running, you have to believe what you're doing. That's 80% of the battle. I've seen some, what you might normally call really atrocious running plans work quite well with kids because they believed in what they were doing, you know, and not where you're like, oh my God, they did that. But no, hey, it worked because the kid, stayed on it. And yeah, there might be other problems or issues or something like that. But that really is a big part of the battle. And I think that, not only everybody would take lead depending upon, I like, Tom hated the taper part of the season. And so I would always kind of take care of the taper, the last couple of weeks, because one of the things that my coach O'Brien at UMass always was perfect at, he would always have us ready for the end of the year. And, so I had that and so it was interesting because Tom would be like, okay, well, listen, I just like this is so much easier. You go ahead and take care of the taper part. And, and so it is good to have, coaches that recognize what they do well and be able to, and be able to take but then also at the end of the day, it's still their program.
Yes. And I like what you said about, if it's, I think you've got to follow a plan that has, that plan has its focus and the things that the extra things that build into the plan. And if you're following a couple of different plans, then you're getting almost a watered down overall training plan, I think, instead of just like, hey, here's the focus. Let's make sure we're all in on this one direction that we're heading instead of getting pulled in different directions.
Correct. Yeah, I always view if you were to distill a running program down to its very, very basics, everything in running is based upon a singular curve where you basically have a breakdown cycle, a recovery cycle, a the typical periodization, super compensation. This is basically a fancy name for saying that you get better. Your muscles recover from the initial. And if you have multiple programs or influences, that cycle gets disrupted. And I think every coach has seen a kid where they just kind of do this and stay steady because they're not, either something's wrong with the cycle or they're not recovering properly or something like that. And I think that if you have a singular type of coaching, you have a much better chance of getting that beautiful, smooth cycle where they're just improving and moving up along those lines. I think that is key because we all seen that. It just, when you get on that cycle, it's like you can't do anything wrong. It just, the kid keeps just getting better.
Yes.
And, it's a wonderful thing to see, but but also it's just as frustrating if there's, for rather lack of other term, noise in the signal, then you don't get that smooth transition. And that's where athletes tend to plateau. I mean, we always have the saying, there is no improvement without recovery.
Right. Absolutely. What do you think you've improved on since you've started coaching at Walton?
Well, lots of things. I mean, obviously, considering where I was, I do think that one of the great things about coaching so many kids and that exposes you is more from the psychological perspective. The nuts and bolts. I mean, as a competitive runner for so many years, as having been around a lot of really good coaches and things like that, even at the beginning, I had a pretty good, solid basis of what the nuts and bolts and all that kind of stuff. But what having all, when you have a kids, group of 30, 40, 50 kids each year, you get to start to see patterns and, in terms of the psychological component of coaching. And that is really what I think has helped improve, because now I've got, coached hundreds and hundreds of kids, and you can kind of be able to see patterns and way the kids might approach something. And that way you might present a certain, a certain way of talking with them about running. And I think that's probably some ways one of the most difficult things of coaching, but also some of the ways the variability, because you might have 40 kids and you might have 40 different ways that you might approach the exact same thing on a team,
Yeah.
and to be able to recognize the patterns that go within the team and be able to apply them on an individual basis, and hopefully help the kids get through some of those. Sometimes it takes 4 years, but it is one of those things that I think I've learned more about that than probably just about anything else.
I love that because, people think or maybe it could seem like it's just, you see the times and you see how kids improve, but the behind the scenes stuff of what it took to get that kid there, some of the personal victories. I saw Jay Johnson mention that on a post recently. I love that stuff where it might not even be the top kids. It might be the kid that, mid pack of JV, but they've really worked on the psychological part of the race.
Yep.
And and they break 21 minutes, and we're going to celebrate that like they, just set a world record. I mean, it's awesome to see the improvements in that way.
It is, and it is often that psychological breakthrough that really starts the ball rolling downhill.
Mhm.
Some good example is we had a very good runner who graduated last year, Joseph Minecci, and he was not your prototypical superstar and freshman, and then kept on going through. He had to develop, and a lot of that was just putting the components together about the hard work and the preparation. He was always just instinctually a just incredible competitor. That's one. He's one of those kids. Didn't have to be super fit, but could compete so well that he was just super strong. And so it took him his basically 2.5 years to start putting all the other components in there. And then once things start getting there, it all starts to click. And it's these little pieces, and particularly from the to channel that kind of competitive energy with everything else, and understand. So it's something that's it's fascinating, and it is as vital as hills or long distance days and things like that, is to be able to have that psychological component. And because my feeling is that every kid we're all very good at analyzing, I guess, the pluses and minuses, whether we're going to expend on our energies on a certain thing. We justify it based upon what the benefit we're going to get and what the costs are. And if you can figure out how a kid is making that calculation, you can then influence that calculation. So if you just look and say, okay, why are they not wanting either to do the work or do something like that? Well, not most of the time, it's because they felt that the benefits were not worth the cost. And so if you can understand exactly, then you've got one thing, you've got two ways of doing that. You can either decrease the cost or increase the benefit. And so if you can go ahead, and if you understand how they're doing, the evaluation, then that's truly a key to being a better coach, is that you can go ahead and manipulate that a little bit to be, and then also like, oh, that's why I want to do that. That's where those kind of little breakthroughs may go.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. So we kind of already touched on this, Bill, a little bit, but what are some of your favorite parts of coaching?
There's quite a few. I think most of it is that just the wonderful relationships that you build both within the community, coaching community, and as well as with the kids and the athletes that you have. I do not have any children myself, and I do think in some ways that all the athletes I get to coach tend to become, in some ways, metaphorical children. And my Instagram and my Facebook feed is full of ex-athletes and going on to do wonderful things. And I do think one of the best things about coaching is that it gives you kind of like, you get this look at that and feel like you were part of a process that really, turned into made the world a better place, for lack of a better term. And I by far, that's the most, I think, most important and most satisfying thing as a coach. I think I would say that if you asked any coach, that's probably part of their answer, would be the same thing. But also I think, it's probably secondary, but close to it is just the intellectual stimulation of being able to try to figure out these pieces and parts and how to make them work together. I mean, you always talk about the worst time for a coach is right before a big meet, before the gun goes off, because you really, as much as you like to believe that, yelling at them in the race and stuff like that is something different, but your influence at that point is very limited. And no, I think it's just wonderful to be able to look at all those different, because there's nothing more complex than human beings. And to be able to try to put all those pieces together and be able to make a cohesive plan and be able to see whether it works it is very difficult, but it also is, again, incredibly intellectually stimulating, as well as, being something that makes you quite happy.
Yes. Yeah, I love the cross country and track allows us to kind of flex different muscles a little bit, and
Yep.
there's different challenges in both season, but things that are fun. I like the challenge of all these different events in track, and how do we fit uh, everybody into different places, and who's going to be on the relays, and are they going to do another event, and it's a different challenge than just everybody running the 5K cross country, but you're trying to get 7 people to run well, or at least the majority of them.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's what's interesting is every coach handles that differently.
Mhm.
I mean, I think you've seen some of the spreadsheets that I have built and things like that, and that's the way my mind tends to work. But other coaches, Jack Coleman will do things completely different, but you come up with the same answers, but it's just the way that you arrive at that is lots of times in a very different method. It's just fascinating to watch people do it and how they approach and solve those problems.
Yeah, definitely. Um, and then one last Walton question: any particular moments that stand out to you in all your years at Walton?
Well, there's been a lot. So obviously, the state championships um, are very important. Particularly, I would say, when we won with the boys in 2019, because as a coach, and you've certainly and as an athlete, it is extraordinarily rare when everything comes together. When you have the kids just all perform well, 7 deep, they run, pretty much great and exceed your expectations coming in. And that's certainly one of those, I mean, if you look through that season, we as a boys team were always pretty good, but we ended up losing our maybe 1, 2, or 3 kid early on in the season. He was our number 1 kid in the first or second meet, and had to replace him. And then by the end of the season, where we were nowhere near as good as Harrison and a couple of the other teams in there, to run a state meet where we, if you did a merge, I realized obviously different times, different, all that kind of stuff, where we were significantly ahead of everybody else. It was just it was a testament to fact that just how well things went. And then as a coach, you realize how precious that is. Track is always a little bit different, when you win a state champion, something like that, because it's obviously composed of so many different things.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is just plain luck, and things things happening right. But yeah, I think I would say probably that. And we also certainly had one girls state championship. We were not expecting, we'd lost those same teams by 40 or 50 points a few weeks prior, and then managed to come up and just run a really good race at just the right time and do things. And those are always, those unexpected events are always quite satisfying.
Yes, definitely. Um, well, to kind of put a bow on the end of this episode, I wanted to hit some highlights of the end of this season in Georgia, distance wise. We certainly had some amazing performances at the end of the year, and at the state meet, at the Meet of Champions.
Oh
So
yeah.
I have a couple that I wanted to throw out there, but any that you have, feel free to speak on. Um, First one for me, Hogshead versus Piper, Jameson Piper in the
Mm.
3200 at the state meet. For people that were there, you know what I'm talking about, but people that weren't, you got Jameson Piper with an amazing kick, had won the mile the night before, and then Jackson Hogshead defending state 2 mile champion, and it was just kind of this clash of the Titans, and I really thought Hogshead had not quite pushed the pace enough to to get the win because Piper was hanging around. He had moved up from third to second. He had taken the lead, I think, with 500 to go, uh,
Yeah.
and and Hogshead was still hanging around and given a chase. But I just thought, I think Jameson's got this, and to see that last 100 meters where it really wasn't decided until maybe the last 10 meters. I don't know. I mean, and they both got 8:57. I just thought that was one of the all-time great races. About the only, I told you this yesterday at the Meet of Champions. I think about the only race that maybe I would put a step higher is Tyler Anion versus Arasa, which was the
Hmm.
2010 state meet 2 mile. If you haven't ever watched that race, anybody watching this, it's on YouTube. Look it up. It's amazing. Uh,
Yep.
but this was a close second for me. So thoughts on that race?
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, to emphasize all your thoughts. Yeah, the great thing, and that certainly makes it even more exceptional is the fact that you had the 1600 before, and
Mhm.
just the way that Pfeiffer just dominated that race, and Hogshead ran great.
Mhm.
He did not run badly at all, and
No,
was and then had just kind of gone ahead, and then to come back. That's what set up that 2 miles so well, is to be able to look, and when they've got that history, it's just kind of like, in some ways it's very Hollywood, the way that everything set itself up, and you don't always get that, and you certainly don't always get it when it lives up to the billing.
yes.
But yeah, no, I agree that, though I will say that, on the races, I think you'll probably bring this up, is that 800 was probably the almost the exact opposite type of thing, in the boys 6A, where you end
Yes.
up with 12 guys they all come down at the end.
Yes. I mean, well, first of all, you had the different dynamic of it being just a final this year,
Yeah.
no qualifying. So lining up all 16 at once. And then that last straightaway, I'm sure it was this way in other classifications too, but yeah, the 6A boys was just this wall of humanity coming towards the line.
Yeah. Oh, it was incredible. Yeah.
And
No, I mean, you really, it was easier for me, who did not have a dog in either fight, to watch and
same.
really enjoy those races. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, that's the essence of sport. I mean, that, where you've got both kids just giving everything, and it's nice. And in some ways it's nice that, because they are both Viper and Hogshead, are such good runners, that it's a sense of justice that they each got their own win,
Yes.
because they certainly, deserved the accolades.
Absolutely. Yes. Both great runners and Hogshead going on to college and now Piper getting another year.
Yep. Yep.
So that'll be
Yeah,
interesting.
maybe Tommy Latham doesn't stay the only sub 4 minute miler in Georgia history for very long. Yeah.
I know because Piper ran a 4:05 in that same race for the
Yeah.
4 mile. And anybody that can drop a 1:55 his last 800 of the state
That's
1600.
that's big boy times. Yeah, that
Yes.
is.
Yes. Um, Another uh, state meet I wanted to throw out there, and I wasn't there because they weren't at our location for 6A, but the Pope girls. We've mentioned Coach Kathy Monk on this podcast before, awesome
Mhm.
coach, Hall of Fame coach. They won in the fall with a dominant girls team. And then this spring, the girls won the state track meet. They won the 4x8. They had second, fourth, and eighth in the 1600 with 4:57, five flat, 5:04. I mean, you just don't have that a trio of runners like that every year. Um, And then Dunn, who was eighth in the mile, came back and won the 800. Hutchinson was second in the 800 after getting second in the 16. And then Hicks was first in the 32 with, or excuse me, Hicks was fifth. Hutchinson came back and won the 32 in
Yep.
10:42, but Hicks was fifth in 10:53. I mean, anybody would love to have one of those runners, but to have
Absolutely.
all three on the same team, just kudos to Pope.
Yeah. Now, I think two particular things I want to point out on that. First of all, obviously, yes. Kathy. Nothing is ever perfect because I know they had some injuries and some other things that didn't go quite as planned, and yet they still managed to come through and just dominating performance. But the Dunn's performance in winning that 800, if you haven't seen that video, I highly recommend it because it is. I mean, she comes from way out of the picture, and as we have seen before, particularly on some of the at state, it's not how you start, but how you finish.
Yes.
And she just comes from way back, and it's not so much that she runs a spectacular last lap, is more that she just didn't slow down, and she did a great job, and really under the radar Hicks, where had has been a decent runner for her first few years, but nowhere near she really developed in her senior year and come on strong and become the runner she is. That is not a story you hear all the time. Most of the time, particularly among female athletes, you get the great superstars in one freshman and sophomore year, then you kind of disappear and then they come back. But it's great to see a runner that kind of got better all the way through and just ran an amazing senior year. That's really really good.
Yes, I haven't seen that race. I need to watch that now because that sounds like shades of.
Yeah, no, you really did. Yeah, it's kind of amazing. You do not see her on the screen until the very end.
Yeah, that's sounding like shades of Dave Waddle to me.
Yeah, exactly.
I definitely want to see that. All right, next, South Cobb, and I apologize in advance if I'm saying her last name wrong, but Awoleye, Awoleye,
I think it's close. I think they their nickname is Tosin, and I think that's probably the easiest way to
there we go. I will
just
stick
take
with
the last
Tosin.
part of her first name, and I think that's it. But yeah, she's a phenomenal athlete.
Thank you. Yeah, that I will stick with Tosin. I like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, 2:04 during the season, but then just last night, 2:03 at the Meet of Champions. Um,
Yep.
I That's just amazing. I mean, I anybody that has not seen her race this season, seek out a video because wow, just so impressive.
Yep. Yeah. Now, you look at, I mean, obviously, just a tremendous runner, and obviously she'd been exceptional in the years before. But what she really really changed this year is that you go and look at her splits. She was always going out in 60 61s, and going out that fast, but now she's going out in 61 62 and finishing in 61 62. And just kind of showing it, that the true kind of what you really look for in a true 800, whether you look at some of the greats that have come through high school and stuff recently, and she certainly has a lot of those tools. I think she's going out to California, USC, for finish, continue her track season at that. Then they've produced a lot of tremendous 800-meter runners out there. So I'm sure she will get the chance to really shine. But yeah, she is one of those ones that you kind of look forward to seeing in the future and seeing what kind of noise she makes.
Yes, I mean 800. I mean just has, and I don't know, maybe the 4x8 has had something to do with this, but 800 has certainly gotten a lot faster in Georgia
Yep.
in recent years. But yeah, 2:03. I can't say enough about that. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you think about it, the first year they had the 4x8, and now all of a sudden, it's 6A, it takes 8 minutes to score.
yes,
Big difference.
absolutely. And that's a great segue to the last race I was going to bring up. I didn't see this race in person, but I certainly heard about it. The 4A boys 4x8. You had Pace Academy at 7:53.1 and Stars Mill second 7:53.3. And then the next three schools, St. Pius, North Oconee, Stockbridge, all 7:54. Um,
Yeah.
that is insane. And I think just again a testament to how much that event has change the face of the state track meet. I mean, if there's points to be found, you're going to find four
Yep.
people to run the relay, and people are running times that pre 4x8 at state, you just didn't have as much, and now you see them. The bar is being raised.
It really is, and I think it's kind of self-congratulatory, but I know that you are well aware of the history of how long and how hard we tried to get the 4x8 into the state meet. And it is so nice to see that kind of progress being made and saying, see, this is the kind of wonderfulness. The 4x8, for some reason, I think, 4x8 and 4x4, but, you see magical 4x8s
Yes,
tend to appear. It's this race where you just, whether it's last year when, two teams run 745, 746, and 6A, but, it is a really fun race to watch. And I can't imagine that must have been so exciting, to have, five guys screaming down the last 100 meters. And, you know,
absolutely.
that's a great thing.
Yeah, I mean, and there's so much strategy. There's how do you get, a lot of people are able to use subs at region and sectionals,
Yep.
but especially at sectionals, how strategic you have to be with it being a 1 day meet. And can you afford to plug somebody else in, or do you have to roll with your A team and just hope they survive in advance? And now with a 2 day state meet, still strategy of, you know, do people double? Do people, 4x8
Yeah.
first?
Is it worth it? Yeah. I mean, can you go, all right, listen, if you're going to be 10th, 11th, 12th, I'd rather focus on the 4x8.
Yes. Yeah. Do you have a chance to get on the podium in the mile, or do you save it, or do you have a kid who can handle the double? Because not every kid can handle it
Yep.
well. Maybe they'll do it in the future if they're an underclassman, but some got to pick which one is my ceiling higher,
Yep.
and and so I just love all that strategy and trying to put the pieces together.
Now, it's truly the closest thing that you'll get to cross country in
Yes,
track. Yeah, where you kind of, okay, you need four and you need four good guys and to do those things. But yeah, it's the same satisfaction of coaching when they all operate on all cylinders. It's a as a coach, it kind of just makes you really happy.
absolutely. The only other thing I think of when you just said that is when we used to have the coaches invitational in the four by
Or a four by
sixteen.
16. Yeah,
That
exactly.
felt like cross country on the track, for sure. Now we get it in the 4x8, but
Oh gosh, I wish we could have had that. Can you imagine this year?
I know.
You imagine a Pope versus Marietta girls 4x16,
Oh
or
wow, I know.
or I think you actually obviously even just a Marist by six boys 4x16. You would have there are some really great races I would have loved to have seen.
Absolutely, because Marietta and Pope had a classic showdown. I know at the Cobb County meet in the four
Yep.
by eight, and at the both of them running well under 9:20, and so yeah, imagine the 4 by mile. So shout out to Coach Monk who used to host the coaches invitational. Those were
Yep.
great meets under the lights. Georgia Tech loved that meet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's truly it is one of the things I do miss most about having grown up in New Jersey and done track is that we always had Penn relays.
Yeah,
Yeah, and that was one of those things that you had a lot of those the 4x8s, the DMRs, and the things like that because everybody wanted to go to Penn, and go and race in front of 35,000 fans or whatever it was that year. And I do think that it's with obviously with the early season, it's not compatible with Georgia, but it would be nice.
yes, absolutely. Um, well, one final uh, question, Bill. Any other performances or state of Georgia running, or any kind of final words you want to say before we sign off here?
Well, I think to keep it short, I have seen Georgia develop into so much better of a distance powerhouse as a state over the last few years, and not in just we always had some individuals and things like that were, but now you're starting to see not only the individuals, but they're elevating themselves, but you also see the depth, and I do think that I would that warms my heart And I love, and I think in the state, one of it's not necessarily a single performance that I've seen in looking over the results of the states, but it's the fact that there are good performances just about everywhere.
Yes.
Whatever the groups are that you look at before, we know there are times early on in the state, where you'd go in some of the lower groups and it'd just be like ridiculous, in terms of, the lack of competition. And now it's, even at the smallest levels, you still see some really, really good quality performances. And I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from the season. And I think that, it's only served to emphasize it.
100% agree. That's, yeah, very happy with what Georgia runners are doing lately for sure, and
Yep.
excited to see what they continue to do in the future.
Yeah. No, hopefully all this fun stuff that's happening with NCAA's and scholarships and lack of places on teams. I now that we've finally gotten ourselves in this great spot, I just hope that none of that goes and screws it all up.
I know.
Because that could be a whole nother 20-minute conversation between us.
Absolutely. I hope kids can find their place to shine wherever that may be. If it's not the traditional routes maybe they took in the past, they
Yep.
can find somewhere
I
for them to
agree.
keep going. Well, Bill, thank you so much for this conversation. It was great. Loved chatting, uh, running with you as always. So thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for doing this, because I think it is important. I think that, obviously continuing to help support coaches and, be giving them access to it, different peoples and different perspectives is a wonderful thing. And so I really appreciate all the work that you've done, and everybody associated with this coaches, collective it's just good stuff. And, I heartily support it.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it.